The Pope is the head of the Christian Church, which is the body of Christ, and for over 2,000 years, the Pope has been the moral voice to some of the most pressing political and social issues faced by the world. Unfortunately, the unholiness of some of these holy fathers went way beyond the abominations committed by the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. In this episode, we give a vivid account of periods when rape, murder, corruption, sodomy, pedophilia, and incest were the order of the day in the papal office, and why we consider these men the most scandalous supreme pontiffs in history. Number 7. Pope Stephen VI. Stephen VI became pope on May 22nd of 896, a period marked by political strife in papal politics and rapid successions of pontiffs. In fact, between 896 and 904, a new pope was elected every single year. Upon his pontification, Stephen was bent on taking revenge on his political opponents, including a deceased previous pontiff, Pope Formosus. In January 897, just 8 months in office, Pope Stephen committed sacrilege by ordering the corpse of Formosus be exhumed and brought to the papal court for judgment, accusing the deceased pope of perjury and having acceded to the papacy illegally. The corpse was placed on a throne, and a deacon was appointed to answer for the deceased pontiff. At the end of the trial, Formosus was pronounced guilty, and his papacy was declared null and void. The corpse was stripped of its papal vestments and thrown into the Tiber River. This spectacle turned public opinion in Rome against Stephen. Worse, the body was washed to the river banks, and rumor began to spread that the corpse performed miracles. People were convinced that Stephen had defiled the body of a saint. This resulted in a violent uprising that deposed and imprisoned Stephen. Stephen was strangled in prison in August of 897. Number 6. Pope John XII. John XII became Supreme Pontiff on December 16th of 955. He was a member of the powerful Tusculum family, which dominated papal politics for over half a century. His father, Alberic II, was the ruler of Rome. Therefore, John was not only the head of the church, but also the secular prince of Rome. Unfortunately, his princely instincts were way stronger than his taste for ecclesiastical matters. John became pope in his early 20s. His papacy was marked by youthful exuberance. He turned the papal residence into a brothel, hosting multiple orgies, and gambled with church funds. He had sexual intercourse with the widows of Roman noblemen, his father's concubines, and even some of his own nieces. He murdered any bishops who opposed his papacy and blinded his confessor. During John's papacy, the rank of bishop was available for sale to anyone who could afford the price in cash. In fact, a 10-year-old boy in the city of Todi was ordained bishop after his father made the required payment to Pope John. John's worldly ways were scandalous to the extent that King Otto I of Germany, who had sworn to protect the church's integrity and the pope's territories, became fed up with John. His appeals to the young pope to give up his worldly ways fell on deaf ears. On May 14th of 964, Pope John XII was killed by an outraged husband who caught his wife in an adulterous sexual encounter with the Holy Father. Number 5. Pope Sixtus IV. Sixtus became head of the Catholic Church on August 9th of 1471. His papacy was marked by an unprecedented level of nepotism in the church. He made sure all strategic church positions were occupied by his blood relatives. 2 of his nephews, Pietro Riario and Girolamo Riario, were entrusted with the church's foreign affairs. Another nephew, Raphael Riario, was made cardinal in charge of church properties and revenues, and also entrusted with the prestigious Palazzo della Cancelliera, while 2 other nephews, Giuliano della Rovere and Giovanni della Rovere, became his confidants and managed strategic church affairs. Other blood relatives and friends were randomly appointed cardinals and bishops. But nepotism was the least of Sixtus's problems. He was known to have an unquenchable appetite for sex. He had at least 6 illegitimate children that the church had knowledge of, including a child he fathered with his own sister. Sixtus was also a lover of boys. In exchange for sexual favors, he made several young men cardinals, some of which he openly celebrated for their good looks. Ironically, despite his sexual indulgences, he severely policed others, levying attacks on prostitutes and a special charge for priests who had mistresses. Sixtus also issued the Aeterni Regis on June 21, 1481, giving the Portuguese the right to acquire slaves along the African coast by force. Sixtus died on August 12, 1484, following a brief illness that lasted only 4 days. Number 4. Pope Boniface VIII. Boniface VIII became head of the Catholic Church and ruler of the Papal States on December 24, 1294, following the unexpected resignation of Pope Celestine V. Boniface was a power-hungry pope. Immediately after his pontification, he erected statues of himself all over Rome. He was ruthless towards all political rivals and adopted an aggressive foreign policy. During his reign, he issued the Ascolta Filii, declaring that all kings were subordinate to the power of the Roman pontiff. This created a rancor with foreign kings, especially King Louis IX of France, whom Boniface eventually excommunicated. The decree also implied that both spiritual and temporal powers were under the Pope's jurisdiction, meaning worldly matters like the conquest of lands and acquisition of wealth were equally as important as the spiritual matters of the soul. In 1298, he invaded and captured Colonna Palestrina and other political rival cities and razed them to the ground, even though they surrendered peacefully under Boniface's assurances that they would be spared. Boniface was also a pedophile. When confronted about it, he said intercourse with boys was no different than rubbing one hand against the other. Boniface died of a violent fever on October 11, 1303, shortly after receiving the sacraments and making the usual profession of faith. Number 3. Pope Leo X. Leo became Supreme Pontiff on March 9, 1513, following the death of Pope Julius II. Leo was the second son of Lorenzo de' Medici, the de facto ruler of Florence and head of the powerful Medici banking family. Leo was accustomed to the extravagant Medici lifestyle and love for art. He was a patron of music and the theater, painting, sculpture, and poetry, on which he lavishly spent church money. Leo had homosexual relations with his chamberlains, who were mainly handsome young men from noble families. However, unlike many of his predecessors, Leo was very discreet about his sexuality. He even urged his cardinals to limit the number of boys they kept for their sexual pleasure, lest the world become aware of the prevalence of sodomy in the house of God. Leo used church funds to finance his family's political feuds, including a costly war in 1517 that secured his nephew the dukedom of Urbino, but which brought the church to the brink of bankruptcy. In order to replenish the church funds, Leo resorted to selling indulgences in the church and accepting payments from unbelievers to secure a place for them in heaven, causing the Reformation led by Martin Luther and the eventual birth of Protestantism. In response, Leo declared Martin Luther a heretic and excommunicated him from the church. This angered sympathizers and triggered the spread of Lutheranism throughout Western Europe and Scandinavia. On December 1, 1521, Leo died from pneumonia at the age of 45, just 10 months after Martin Luther's excommunication. By the end of his papacy, the church coffers were virtually empty. Number 2. Pope Alexander VI. Alexander VI, born Rodrigo Borgia to the prominent Borgia family, became Supreme Pontiff on August 11, 1492. He was first appointed cardinal at the age of 25, immediately after his uncle, Alonso Borgia, was elected as Pope Calixtus III. A year later, his uncle again appointed him the apostolic chancery, making him second in the church hierarchy after the Pope. Needless to say, Alexander's rise through the ranks of the church was mainly through nepotistic appointments, a practice which he eventually continued throughout his papacy. When Alexander himself became pope, he immediately appointed his 17-year-old illegitimate son, Cesare Borgia, Archbishop of Valencia, and another illegitimate son, Giovanni Borgia, the Duke of Gandia and commander of the papal army. Also, another illegitimate son, Geoffrey Borgia, was given territories in the Kingdom of Naples, which resulted in serious conflicts with King Ferdinand of Naples. In order to dominate the College of Cardinals, he promoted his son Cesare, then age 18, to the rank of cardinal, as well as Alessandro Farnese, brother of his favorite mistress, Giulia Farnese. In addition, Alexander was very manipulative, taking advantage of the slightest opportunity to increase the wealth and status of his sons. He entered a secret agreement with King Louis XII of France to approve the annulment of his marriage to Queen Joan of France and permit the king to marry Anne of Brittany on the condition that the Pope's son, Cesare Borgia, is made Duke of Valentinois, a region in southeastern France. Also, when war broke out between France and Spain over the control of Naples, the Pope was ready to offer support to whichever party offered him the most advantageous terms. He offered to help France on the condition that Sicily, which was under French control, be handed to his son Cesare. He then offered to help Spain in exchange for Siena, Pisa, and Bologna. Pope Alexander also had an unrestrained sexual urge. He had so many mistresses, openly acknowledged his 9 illegitimate children, and indulged in a sexual relationship with his own daughter, Lucrezia Borgia. Pope Alexander VI died on August 18, 1503, allegedly by poison. The Venetian ambassador described his rapidly decomposing corpse as the ugliest and most horrible dead body ever, without any form or likeness of humanity. Number 1. Pope Benedict IX. In October of 1032, the Roman Catholic Church transitioned into a period of despicable atrocities when a teenage boy became the supreme pontiff in the name of Pope Benedict IX. With one of the most powerful armies in his possession and an unrestricted access to the papal treasury, the 19-year-old sexual pervert suddenly found himself wielding more power than he could ever imagine. He sponsored multiple sex orgies in the papal household, orchestrated countless murders, rapes, and castrations, and eventually sold his papacy to his godfather for an enormous amount in cash. Pope Benedict IX was born Theophylactus of Tusculum in the year 1012 to the powerful Tusculum family. He was born the son of Alberic III, the Count of Tusculum. Benedict was a close blood relative of several previous popes, including 2 of his uncles, a granduncle, and many others before them. When his uncle, Pope John XIX, passed away in October 1032, Benedict made an inexplicable ascension to the papal chair after his father bribed political elites in Rome and paid off all influential church members who tried to lay claims. Benedict was less than 20 at the time. He essentially inherited the title, as his 2 immediate predecessors were his direct uncles. Benedict's reign was characterized by a wave of scandals and factional strife within the church. He was bisexual. He carried out non-consensual sexual intercourse with both men and women in the church, mainly by abusing his authority and, on several occasions, by use of violence. The young pope was a serial rapist. He bullied all his victims and witnesses into silence with the threat of propaganda and constantly reminded them of the repercussions of non-compliance. His rape victims were not just men and other women, but animals as well. Even with all these, he was still not able to gratify his sexual impulses. As such, he regularly organized sex orgies, during which he and his men freely engaged in an open and unrestrained gangbang with other men, women, and animals. To make matters worse, these orgies were hosted at the Apostolic Lateran Palace, which was then the principal papal residence and located adjacent to the Papal Archbasilica of St. John, thereby creating a highly sexualized church environment. In addition to his sexual perversion, the young Benedict was also a gangster. He and his clergy hoodlums orchestrated a series of murders explicitly targeting those who tried to oppose his rule or lay claim to his papacy. For 12 consecutive years, the church witnessed a horrifying magnitude of tyranny under Pope Benedict IX. Even the general public was fed up with the pope's impropriety. In December of 1044, Pope Benedict IX was toppled by a rival political faction and replaced by Pope Sylvester III. In response, Benedict rallied his powerful Tusculum family militia, marched on Rome, overpowered the papal army, and deposed Pope Sylvester III on March 10, 1045. Benedict became pope for the second time. However, he was gradually getting fed up with the responsibilities and torments of being a pope, especially because his office prevented him from marrying a cousin he was infatuated with. Benedict therefore sold his papacy to his godfather, John Gratian, then Archpriest of St. John by the Latin Gate, for a considerable amount of money in cash. John Gratian became Supreme Pontiff in the name of Pope Gregory VI. Gregory's papacy lasted only 6 months. He was asked to stand down by King Henry III of Germany, who then nominated a fellow German, Bishop Suiger of Bamberg, to the papacy as Pope Clement II on December 25, 1046. But Clement's papacy also lasted only 10 months, following his sudden death by lead sugar poison, allowing Benedict to sneak himself into Rome and occupy the papal office for the 3rd time. Benedict was eventually chased out of Rome by King Henry's forces in July of 1048. His 3rd papacy lasted only 8 months. A year later, he was summoned to stand trial for selling the papacy, but failed to appear before the council and was excommunicated. Benedict died in 1056 in a monastery at the age of 44. Ferdinand Gregorovius, a specialist in Roman history and critic of the papacy, described Pope Benedict IX as a demon from hell who was disguised as a priest and occupied the chair of St. Peter. Thank you for watching. If you have a video idea, why not leave a comment below? And if we make it, we'll give you a big shout out. And please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more awesome videos on crime history and historical scandals.